right. Good to see everyone today. Hopefully you're doing well. Thanks for coming out this Sunday, joining us for our Sunday worship. If it's your first time here at Family Chapel, we welcome you. My name is Josh. I'm a pastor here at FC. It's just a huge privilege for me to be with you on this Sunday. I just want to also give a quick shout out to B-Bay. I didn't ask him for permission with this, but for those of you who don't know, Brian actually had surgery this past week, but praise God it went well. He's recovering well, so thanks to everyone who's been praying for him. If you can continue to pray for him and Suji, not just because of recovery, but in about a month and a half, they're getting married. So there's a lot going on for them. So if you can just continue to keep them in your prayers, that'd be great. But thank you to those who have been praying. We are continuing our series through the Gospel of Luke. And as Jesus has been making his way towards Jerusalem, we've been seeing what discipleship looks like. We've been seeing what it looks like to follow after him as his disciples. And hopefully one of the things that you've noticed as we've been looking through Luke is that discipleship to Christ is holistic. Right? Discipleship to Jesus involves all of life, right? Every arena of life, all of life, not just church life, not just what happens here on Sundays from 12:45 to 2 p.m., right? But all of life falls under the realm of discipleship to Christ, right? When we follow Jesus, everything in life, every arena of life belongs in following after him. And that also applies to how we handle our wealth, right? It also applies to how we use the things that we have been given. So we're going to dive right in. And the question we want to answer or explore today is this. We want to ask, as disciples of Christ, what does right stewardship look like? As followers of Christ, as believers, as Christians, what does handling our possessions in the right way look like? Well, to answer that question, we'll be looking at Luke chapter 16, starting with verse 1. Luke chapter 16, starting with verse 1. If you have a Bible, I encourage you to turn there with me. If not, no worries. These verses will be for you in the bulletin as well as up on the screen. But if you do have a Bible, let's turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, starting with verse 1. And here in Luke 16, Jesus gives a very strange parable, a very interesting parable. In fact, this parable is so strange that one of the leading Bible scholars for the Gospel of Luke says that this is the hardest parable that Jesus gives, right? This is the most confusing, most complex parable that Jesus presents in the Gospel of Luke. So this can either go well or it can go not so well. So let's pray that it does go well. But here, Jesus turns to his disciples and he gives them a parable. And in this little parable, he explains to them what proper stewardship or right stewardship of wealth looks like. See, in this parable, Jesus describes a steward or a manager. Now, back in the day, it was very common for the wealthy to have managers oversee their properties, oversee their businesses. So managers had the authority to make important decisions on behalf of these business owners. This was a very common setup back in the first century among wealthy households. Well, Jesus takes this economic setup and he gives a little parable to show how disciples are to handle their wealth. So let's take a look at this parable. Take a look at Luke chapter 16. It'll be starting with verses 1 and 2. Luke 16 verses 1 and 2. This is what it says. Now Jesus told his disciples, so he turns away from the crowd and he now turns to his disciples. Jesus told his disciples, here's the parable. There was a rich man or a rich wealthy owner whose manager, whose steward, was accused of wasting his possessions. So this owner called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? What is this? What are you doing? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." All right, we're going to pause here just for a little bit. So we see here in this parable that this manager has not been doing a very good job of managing his owner's property. Right? Now, we're not told the details about what this guy has been doing, but we are told, Jesus says in verse 2, that he's been wasting the owner's possessions. Right? He's been pulling some sort of shady business behind the owner's back, or maybe he's been lining his own pockets, maybe he's been stealing. Right? We don't know what he's doing exactly, but he has not been a good manager. Well, he's been caught, right? The owner has figured out this guy has not been doing a good job. So he brings in the manager and asks him to submit a record of his account because he's fired, right? He's lost his job. Well, now this unemployed manager is afraid. He doesn't know exactly what to do. He's just lost his job and he's processing all this. So as he's thinking upon the situation, he tries to plan what he needs to do next. He tries to come up with a series of next steps to get him out of this predicament. And this is what he comes up with. All right, take a look at verses 3 to 7. This is his great plan that he comes up with in verses 3 to 7. Well, it says this. Well, the manager said to himself, man, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors, people who owe his master money or property. And he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, here, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. And he told him, take your bill and make it 800. All right, so as this unemployed manager thinks about his situation, he comes up with a solution. And it is a shady solution. It doesn't get any shadier than it is a very shady solution, right? He's thinking about a scenario, and he knows he's not strong enough for manual labor. And he feels way too ashamed, way too embarrassed to go around begging people for money, begging people for food, right? He doesn't want to do any of that stuff. So he comes up with a plan, and this is his plan. His plan is to make friends with some of the wealthy owners who are friends with his boss, right? He wants to cozy up with some of the people who owe his master money. Now, these people are not small fries. These guys are big fish. These are other wealthy owners. And his plan is to scratch their backs now, so later on, after he is kicked out of the house, after he loses his job totally, right, they will then scratch his back. This is his plan, right? So he calls together these debtors and he strikes a deal with them behind his master's back. One debtor, one of them owes 900 gallons of olive oil. That's a lot of oil. That's a lot of oil, right? It's worth about 3 years' wages. Well, he takes that guy's bill, right, and he cuts it in half, saves him $60,000. Well, another debtor owes 1,000 bushels of wheat. That's a lot of wheat. That's about 100 acres worth of wheat, right? Worth about 10 years' wages. Well, he takes that guy's bill and he cuts it by 20%, saves him about $80,000. Well, this manager goes behind the owner's back and he does some wheeling, he does some dealing, some scheming, and he makes up this plan. Now, Bible scholars who look at this passage, they can't really agree on what exactly is going on here, right? They come up with all sorts of explanations as to what this manager is doing. See, some Bible scholars look at this and they say that this manager, he had a shady boss. And this shady boss was upcharging his clients with high interest rates. So what this manager is doing is he's removing these high interest rates. Well, other scholars look at this and they say, no, this manager is just taking out his commission. He's taking out his cut from these business deals. What this manager is doing is he's removing his management fees from the debt. Well, in my opinion, I don't stand a chance against these Bible scholars, right? But in my opinion, none of those options really fit the details of the parable. Right? The way that Jesus tells this parable doesn't lead me to see that as what's going on. Rather, in my opinion, I think that this manager is just being plain shady McGrady, right? He's just being a shady dude. He's looking out for number one, and he's willing to stab his old boss in the back just to make sure that he's okay. But it's here where things get really weird. It gets really weird because eventually the owner finds out what this manager is doing. He hears news that this manager is going around cutting some shady deals behind his back. And we would expect this owner to get angry, to get furious. Like, what are you doing with my money? What are you doing with my property? But when this owner confronts the manager, he says, good job, man. That's brilliant. Good job. What? Right, take a look at verse 8. Jesus continues the parable and he says, this master commended, honored, applauded, said good job to the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Right, this is crazy. Right, this is crazy. Like, what's going on? Why is this manager commending his why is this owner commending his dishonest manager? We have to be clear here. Right? The owner is not praising the manager for literally stealing $150,000 from him. Right? The owner is not praising the manager for being shady. Rather, the owner is praising the manager for being shrewd, for being strategic, for being clever, for being wise, for being shrewd. Right? It's kind of like this. This is a dumb analogy, but it's kind of like this. Believe it or not, I hate losing. Right? I know it doesn't seem like it. I smile all the time. I know pastors will say, there's no losers out there. Everyone's a winner. Treasures in heaven for everyone. Yeah. I know pastors will say that. But I hate losing. Right? Even when it comes to playing basketball with church people on Monday nights, I hate losing. Right? I remember this one time. We were playing a game on Monday night, and it was pretty close, right? We usually play up until 13 points or 11 points. And it was a really close game, and it came down to the final point, game point. So whoever makes the next basket wins. Now, the other team had the ball. They had the possession, and we needed a stop. Because if they score, game over. So we need to have a stop here. Well, I can't remember who had the ball. It was a small guy, maybe Abe. I don't know, right? It was a small guy who had the ball, right? And he was driving towards the hoop for the layup because he wants to win the game. Right? And I'm thinking, you come in here, barbecue chicken time, right? I'm going to smack that ball so hard, I'm going to block it so hard, right? And one of the greatest feelings in a basketball game is like blocking someone, right? Because not only do you make them stop from scoring the point, but you just demoralize them, right? They have no confidence after that to come into the paint ever again, right? Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's not. It's just amazing, right? So I'm like, man, this guy's coming in. He's going for a layup. Oh, not in my house, right? I'm going up, right? So he's ready. I'm ready. He goes up. I go up to meet him. And as I get ready to swat that ball like no other, like to get it out of here, right? He pump fakes me, right? He goes up and down. I'm like, oh, no. And I go flying in the other direction. An easy bucket for him. Easy 2 points. Game over, right? I don't think it was Abe because he would have missed, right? Right? Easy 2 points. And we lose the game, right? And I'm frustrated because I hate losing, right? I'm annoyed. I'm angry. I'm like, dang it. I lost us this game. But even then, even amidst all the frustration, even amidst all the disappointment, all the, I can still go up to that person and say, hey, man, good game, right? That was a good move, man. You got me. You got me with that pump fake. I didn't see that coming at all. Good game. And in that similar way, this owner looks at what his manager has done, and he is blown away. Like, he is astonished, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy pulled it off. Right? Now, he can't applaud his dishonesty, but he can appreciate this guy's clever resourcefulness. And that's the key to understanding this parable. Jesus is not saying, hey, go out to your bosses and stab them in the back. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying, go out to your employers and cheat them out of their money or their businesses or their... He's not saying that. But what he is saying is this. He's saying, go and learn from this manager. Go and learn from him how to be wise, how to be resourceful, how to be strategic, how to be shrewd. See, being shrewd means knowing what the future holds, knowing your circumstances, and acting rightly in light of that. In this parable, this manager knew what was in store for him, and so he responded in a timely manner. And this now becomes the launching point for Jesus to give us 3 applications on how we as believers are to be good stewards of our wealth, on how we are to use our possessions, on how we are to be good stewards, good managers of the things that God has entrusted to us. Now, as we go through these 3 applications, this is a warning. I don't want us to fall into the trap of thinking that this passage or this sermon is just limited to our money, that this sermon is about our bank accounts or our wallets. It is, but it's much more than that, because you see, everything that we have is part of the wealth that God has entrusted to us. Everything that we have, our health, a big one, our time, our opportunities, our education, our relationships, everything that we have, all of that is part of what God has entrusted to us. All of that is part of our wealth too. And Jesus calls us to be good stewards of it all. So here we go. 3 applications, 1, 2, and 3. The first application is this. As disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like, number 1, wisely using wealth to win friends to Christ. Right, wisely using wealth to win friends to Christ. As Christians, we are to be good stewards of everything that God has entrusted us with for the sake of building relationships to attract people to the gospel. Right, take a look at what Jesus says in verses 8 through 9. He gives application number 1 here. In verses 8 through 9, he says this. In the middle of verse 8, he continues and he explains. He says, "For the people of this world are more shrewd." They are shrewd, wise, resourceful, crafty. They are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light, disciples, Christians, believers. He says, I tell you, These are the words coming out of Jesus' mouth. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, and it will be gone one day, when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Or maybe a better translation is, they, your friends that you've made, will welcome you into eternal dwellings. Here Jesus says that the people of this world are shrewd. They're wise. They have foresight. They plan. They prepare. They strategize. They make the most of their situations. And in this parable, this manager is shrewd. He uses money that he cannot keep to build relationships that he will not lose. And Jesus turns around, tells his disciples, you need to be more shrewd, just like that manager. We need to wisely use what has been entrusted to us so that we can build relationships for the sake of the gospel. See, Christians should be challenged when they look out at the world and they see the world working hard. When they see the world planning and scheming and grinding it out, making things happen, Christians should be challenged by those things. The world working so hard, grinding it out for things that will not ultimately last. Right? You go to Vegas, right? And maybe you've been there recently, but you go to Vegas and you see people in 100-degree weather passing out postcards that are no buenos. Like you look at the postcard, like, whoa, what am I looking at, right? Passing out postcards in 100-degree weather that are no buenos. Right? I think about myself, and I don't know if I'm willing to stand in 100-degree weather passing out postcards for the sake of the gospel. That's crazy. The people of the world put more effort into the exploitation of women than we do into the exportation of the gospel. That's crazy. Right, I look at people like LeVar Ball, and I don't know if you know this guy or what your opinion about this guy is. I look at people like LeVar Ball, and I can respect him because that man is grinding. Right? I don't agree with a lot of what he says. I think he says a lot of foolish things, but I can respect what he's doing. I can respect his grinds because he is shrewd. Right? When you have the sports media talking about you almost every day, and when you're invited to participate in the WWE, right? When you're given your own reality TV show, when you have a pastor bringing you up in a Sunday sermon, right? You're doing something right. He is being shrewd. He's being strategic. He's being crafty. He's making the most of his opportunity. See, the world in their pursuit of fleeting things that will not ultimately matter a million years from now, the world in their pursuit of fleeting matters is quite shrewd. And Christians should be challenged by that. Christians should be challenged by that. Because Christians are called to be wise. Christians are called to be resourceful, to be strategic, to be shrewd. Now, we don't get ahead in the world by being shady, but we are to wisely use the resources that we have been entrusted with to make an eternal kingdom impact. Just like the manager, we are to use up the wealth that we cannot keep to build up relationships that we will not lose. Jesus says in verse 9 that our money will be gone one day. Our wealth will be gone one day. Our time here, our health, our possessions, all those things will be gone one day. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when we die, we do not take anything with us. But we are called to be wise stewards so that others may come to know Jesus through us. And there's a lot of ways to apply this, right? A lot of ways to apply this. But let me just give a few examples. Maybe this resonates with you, right? Being a wise steward may look like opening up your home or your apartment, your dorm room, so that you can invite friends or neighbors over for a meal. As you have a meal together, you build up a relationship and have an opportunity then to share the gospel. I've been challenged because we've recently moved into a new apartment complex down in Fullerton, and we don't know our neighbors at all. Like, we avoid our neighbors. Like they're walking like, oh, let's stay inside for now. I wait until they pass. And we don't know our neighbors at all. And yet that is such a huge opportunity that God has given to us to open up our small one-bedroom apartment in Fullerton and say, hey, come on over for coffee. Come on over for a meal. Let's get to know one another. Here's the gospel, by the way. Right? A huge opportunity that God has entrusted to us. See, number two, being a wise steward may look like wisely investing into the lives of others, pouring out the resources that God has given to you to mentor and disciple those around you. One of the biggest factors as to why I moved into the direction of pastoral ministry was because I had a mentor who met with me and a few other guys every single Saturday for about a year. Every Saturday we would meet for about a year. And every Saturday he would buy us some delicious Noah's bagels. And because we were college students and all we ate during the week was spaghetti, right? We loved these bagels. And as we ate these bagels together on Saturday mornings, this guy would teach us how to study the Bible. He would teach us how to teach the Bible. He would take in our prayer requests, and he would pray for us. And that took up 2 hours of his time every single week. And buying all those boxes of bagels definitely added up. But his investment in me has really impacted the trajectory of my life. And we can do that too. You can do that with your kids. You can do that with your roommates. You can do that with the very people sitting next to you here at Family Chapel. Last example, in the workplace, in your job, part of being a good steward and wisely using our opportunities is simply to do our work well. Simply to do our work well. Right? In many cases, being an effective witness, having an opportunity to share the gospel at work is not going to start by forming a Bible study during lunch. And it's not going to start by having a prayer meeting before the workday starts. And don't get me wrong, those things are good things. They're amazing things. But in most cases, right, for the most part, in many cases, being an effective witness at work simply starts with doing your job well, coming to work on time, having a good attitude, getting your stuff done well. This is a call towards excellence. Be excellent in your work. Be a good steward of your job to attract others to Christ so that when you do start a Bible study, or when you do start a prayer meeting, or when you do have an opportunity to share the gospel, those who have seen your work are drawn in. They are attracted because of your work ethic, because of your attitude, because of how you carry out your job. See, as disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like wisely using wealth to win friends to Christ. Right? As Christians, we have been called to be good stewards of our wealth by wisely investing what has been entrusted to us for the sake of attracting people to the gospel. That's application number one. Well, Jesus gives application number two when it comes to stewarding wealth. And he says this in number two, as disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like, number two, faithfully using wealth, whether we have a lot or whether we have little. Faithfully using wealth, whether having much or having little. See, as Christians, we are to be good stewards of our wealth by being faithful with whatever has been entrusted to us, whether it's a lot or whether it's a little. Take a look at what Jesus says in verses 10 to 12. He gives us application number two here in verses 10 to 12. He says this, now whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? See, Jesus makes a very important statement here about being faithful with what has been entrusted to us, whether it's a lot or whether it's a little. Because here's the thing. Present faithfulness will determine future faithfulness. How you are faithful here and now will determine how faithful you will be there and then. Present faithfulness will determine future faithfulness, right? You might think, man, this passage doesn't really apply to me because, hello, I look at my bank account, there's 3 digits, including the decimals. I don't got much money. I'm a college student. I'm poor. I'm broke. But when I get rich, when I make the big bucks, when my bank account is full, then I'll be a good steward, Pastor Josh. I promise. Be careful with that line of thinking. Be careful with that line of thinking. See, we are called to be faithful stewards, whether we have very much or whether we have very little. He was asked, hey, how are you able to win so many championships, so many NCAA basketball championships? And he said, it all begins with paying attention to the basics. See, every year when the new freshmen would come up, the very first thing that Coach Wooden would teach these new freshmen was how to put on their socks, right? Before how to dribble, before how to shoot or make a pass, he would teach them, this is how you put on your socks. Now, Coach Wooden, who won 10 NCAA championships, he wasn't that successful because he was an expert on socks. No, he was successful because he was faithful in the little things. And therefore, he was faithful in the big things, in the great things. See, the real proof of faithfulness is seen in what we do with what we already have. Now, some of us are ambitious, right? Some of us are ambitious. And a godly ambition to do great things for our great God is an awesome thing. We want to do great things. I want to do great things. I want to write books that help millions of people. I want to help build up seminaries that train up pastors and missionaries all across the world. I want to help plant a gospel-centered church in all of LA's 119 neighborhoods. I want to do great things. But what makes me think that God will entrust me with such things if I'm not faithful in the little things? If I'm not faithful in finding myself in the Word and in prayer each day? If I'm not faithful in loving my wife by keeping the toilet seat down after I use it, right? If I'm not faithful in calling my parents and checking up on them, if I'm not faithful in serving those around me, if I'm not faithful in preparing my Sunday sermons as best as I can week after week, if I'm not faithful in picking up the trash that's left behind in the pews after Sunday services, right? If I'm not faithful with these things, I will most undoubtedly not be faithful with those things, because present faithfulness determines future faithfulness. What we do with what we've been given here and now will determine what we will do with what we will be entrusted with there and then. See, we are called to be faithful whether we have been entrusted with a lot or whether we've been entrusted with a little. But not just that. Jesus says something very interesting here. Jesus says here that our stewardship here and now is really just the training wheels for what we will be entrusted with in heaven. He says, the true riches are coming, and the true riches are coming with heaven. What Jesus is saying is, right now, we're swimming in the kiddie pool, right? We may look at the billionaires of the world and marvel at how much wealth and how much stuff that they have. We think, my goodness, they have so much wealth. But what they have is chump change compared to what we will be entrusted with when God's kingdom comes, to what we will be entrusted with in heaven. We're swimming in the kiddie pool right now. I don't know what your view of heaven is, right? But in heaven is not the place where we're going to be fat little angels, right? Fat little angel babies sitting on clouds and playing harps. That is not heaven. Praise God that is not heaven. In heaven, there is going to be a lot of work left to be done. In heaven, when all is said and done, when God's kingdom comes in all of its fullness, when heaven is here, God's people will be busy at work, producing culture and art and technology and beauty and commerce, all for the glory of God. We will have some major responsibilities in God's kingdom, major wealth to be good stewards over. And here's the thing, all this here is a training ground for all that is going to be for us there. And the point is this, if we are not found faithful here and now, if we are not found faithful with the basic stuff, then how can we be faithful with true kingdom riches? See, we are called to be faithful here and now, whether we have much or whether we have little. It begins with being faithful in the little things. That's application number 2. Well, Jesus gives one more application, third and final application. And with this final application, Jesus goes to the heart. See, as disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like, number 3, rightly using wealth with the right heart towards God. Right? Rightly using wealth with the right heart towards God. As Christians, we are called to be good stewards, right? To wisely use everything that God has entrusted to us. Right? We're called to do that with the right heart in service to God. Right? Take a look at what Jesus says in verse 13. We're going to end with this. Third and final application, verse 13. He says this. Now, no one can serve 2 masters. It is impossible. No one can do this. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot, impossible, you cannot serve both God and money. Jesus is saying here, if we want to be good stewards of our wealth, then we must have God alone as our master. See, how we use our possessions will be determined by what possesses our heart. How we use our stuff will be determined by the posture of our hearts. There is a mutually exclusive allegiance going on here. We will either serve God with all of our mind, heart, soul, and strength, with everything that we have. We will either serve God or we will serve something else. Right? God will either be our supreme treasure reigning over our deepest affections, or it will be something else. And if that something else is money, that is a devastating place to be. If that something else is money, that is a devastating place to be, because money is a cruel, cruel master. It promises you everything. It demands from you everything, but it never delivers. Money is a cruel, cruel master. See, when money is your master, you will never be satisfied. You will always want more. See, our hearts have an extraordinary large capacity to take and take and take, to desire and to want, a longing to be filled. And there is not enough money in the world, in the entire universe, that can fill our heart's desires. And so we will jump from credit card to consume and consume and consume. We will jump from car to car, from house to house, from closet to closet, because we will always want more. If money is your master, you will never be satisfied. See, if money is your master, you will never feel secure enough. You'll always find yourself checking your bank account, checking the market, checking your wallet. I will confess, even for myself, if I am not careful, I will let our Sunday offering numbers dictate how secure I feel about Family Chapel's long-term sustainability. Wow, we brought in this amount of money this week. I feel good. We only brought about this amount. I don't feel so good. My security, when it's placed in money, blinds me from the fact that this church does not rest on our offering, but this church rests in the hands of the sovereign Lord, who has said that nothing will overtake his church. But money as our master blinds us to God and makes us feel insecure. See, when money is your master, you become selfish. You're not able to be genuinely generous with what you have. You can't give it away freely or open-handedly because you are so tied to it. When money is your master, people are your enemies. How many families have been ripped apart because money took center stage? How many marriages have ended in divorce because money was held up as the most important thing? See, when money is our master, people are no longer seen as people to be loved, but rather they are seen as obstacles or nuisances to avoid, or objects to be abused, tools to be abused for our own gain. And when money is your master, God is your competition. You have a tight-fisted nature and are unable to be generous in supporting the things of God. Giving offering becomes a burdensome obligation rather than a joyful opportunity. Money is a cruel, cruel master. It demands everything from you, and it promises everything to you, but it never delivers. Money is a cruel, cruel master. And ironically, if you are a slave to money, you will not be very good at using money. But when we have a heart that is content in God, when we have a heart that is satisfied in God, when Jesus is our great treasure, when Jesus is our great joy, when I find my life being content and secure in Him, then and only then can we be good stewards. See, our hearts need to be set right if we are to rightly set our wealth. When our hearts are not set right, we begin to view our wealth as something we have earned. I worked hard for that money, and so we feel entitled to use it to satisfy our own selfish desires. But when our hearts are set right, with God at the center, when our hearts are set right, we begin to view wealth as something that has been graciously entrusted to us. And so we feel a sense of responsibility for using it to fulfill God's kingdom purposes. So often when we buy something, right, when you're at the store, when you're shopping on Amazon or wherever, the thought process often goes like this. And maybe it's just me, but the thought process often goes like, oh man, that looks nice, right? Oh, that looks nice. That looks shiny. That looks cool. That looks fun. Next thought, how much is it, right? Can I afford it, right? Is my wife going to yell at me if I buy it? Right? That's what the credit card is for. It's fine, right? And so often, the biggest questions that run through our minds before we purchase or buy something is, can I afford it? Is it good? Is it nice? Will it be fun for me to have? But rather than primarily asking those questions, we should ask ourselves, does this purchase glorify God? Does buying this thing enable me to better serve God's kingdom purposes? How can I maximize my spending to serve God? When my parents got me a car in college, just as an example, when my parents got me my Kia Sorento in college, my dad literally dedicated that white Kia Sorento in service to the Lord. Right? So we came home, parked the car at home, and we have a little dedication service. Right? And my dad made it absolutely crystal clear to me, Josh, this car is not for you. This car is not for you. This car is for service to the Lord and to others. So use it well, because this car is not for you. See, that was such a God-centered view of that Kia Sorento, such a God-centered view of stuff. That car was a tool to be used in service for God's kingdom. And I think it can be helpful for us in making formal dedications to commit our stuff for God's purposes. Don't get me wrong, everything already belongs to God. But when we dedicate things to the Lord, it can help us get into the right mindset of recognizing everything belongs to God anyways. We are not owners. We're simply stewards, managers. It reminds our hearts of who the true master is. So it may be good for you this week to consider intentionally dedicating your home or your apartment, to open it up, to invite people who are in need of love. It may be good for you this week to intentionally dedicate your Saturday mornings. See, how we use our wealth is totally rearranged when we have God at the center, when we have a God-centered view of stuff. See, as disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like rightly using wealth with the right heart towards God. As disciples of Christ, we've been called to be very intentional in living out our discipleship in every arena of life. And that also includes how we use our wealth, how we handle the things that we have been entrusted with. And so as disciples of Christ, right stewardship of wealth looks like wisely using wealth to win friends to Christ. Faithfully using wealth, right? Whether we have a lot or whether we have a little, and rightly using wealth with the right heart towards God. May God give us the grace to do so, and may we do so to His glory alone.